Hey everyone, welcome back. We're diving into some malicious compliance stories. Today we've got 3 situations where people laid out rules and expectations, and the people on the receiving end followed them so precisely that the results became unrecognizable. One involves an engineer who turned every Wednesday into a holiday, another a worker who took the advice to leave for more money literally, and the last a driver who learned that parking lot cameras don't forget. Here we go. My manager wanted to control when I took my overtime. I gave him exactly what he asked for, just not what he meant. A few years ago, I was working as a commissioning engineer for a mid-sized industrial company. My job was split roughly 60% field service and 40% office work, which meant long stretches away from home, followed by bursts of paperwork and project coordination. It wasn't a bad gig overall, but the field time added up quickly. By early October that year, I'd accumulated about 10 days worth of overtime that I hadn't yet used or scheduled. Our company allowed us to convert overtime into vacation days, which was honestly the smartest option in my case. If I'd taken the overtime as payout, a painful chunk of it would have vanished into taxes. I didn't particularly need the extra cash at the time, so I preferred to bank the days off. I'd already scheduled 3 weeks of regular vacation over Christmas, and I was looking forward to finally being home without a tool bag in sight. One afternoon, my boss, whom I'll call Frank, summoned me into his office. He was a practical guy, but he had that managerial tone that suggested he thought he was being very clever. He leaned back in his chair and said, "You've got about 10 overtime days sitting there. You should start planning when you'll take them." I nodded, expecting that to be the end of it. Then he added, "Just don't take them all at once, and not on Fridays for the rest of the year." I asked him to clarify, keeping my face neutral. "So you don't want me gone for 2 straight weeks?" He replied, "Exactly. We can't have you disappearing for 5 weeks with Christmas added on." He paused and continued, "And no Fridays. We got too many field projects wrapping up at the end of the week." I understood what he was hinting at. Fridays were prime travel days, and he didn't want me cutting out early from field assignments. I went back to my desk and pulled up my calendar. I considered the obvious options. I could split the overtime into 2 full weeks and be done with it. I could create a series of long weekends starting midweek. I even briefly thought about just scattering random Mondays around like confetti. But then I looked at the calendar more closely and noticed something interesting. If I took every Wednesday off for 10 consecutive weeks, it would technically satisfy every condition Frank had laid out. I wouldn't be taking them all at once, I wouldn't be taking any Fridays, and I wouldn't technically be absent for more than 1 day at a time. I leaned back in my chair and felt that quiet, satisfying click when a plan fits perfectly into place. The next morning, I walked into Frank's office with my proposed schedule. "I planned my overtime days," I said. He glanced at the sheet and squinted. "Wednesdays?" he asked. "Every Wednesday?" I smiled politely and replied, "Yes, it breaks them up and none of them are on Fridays, just like you requested." He looked at the list again and hesitated, but there was nothing he could object to without contradicting his own instructions. He wanted to say no, but couldn't. You followed his rules exactly. Any objection now would be admitting his rules were poorly thought out, so he had to nod and watch it happen. Starting the following week, I was home every Wednesday. At first, it felt like a small novelty. Then I realized what it actually meant for my workload. Field trips typically ran Monday through Friday. If I was unavailable every Wednesday, it became logistically inconvenient to send me out on site for a 3 or 4 hour commissioning job. Travel costs, hotel bookings, and project continuity all became awkward to plan around a missing midweek engineer. Within 2 weeks, I stopped receiving field assignments entirely. Instead, I was handling office-based work, documentation reviews, and remote troubleshooting. My colleagues who were still in the field started joking about my permanent hump day holiday. One of them asked, "How did you manage that?" I just shrugged and said, "Good scheduling." Frank wasn't thrilled, but he never formally complained. The policy allowed me to use overtime as leave. His 2 restrictions were met precisely. I wasn't gone for a 5-week stretch, and I wasn't disappearing every Friday afternoon. What he hadn't anticipated was how disruptive a single midweek absence could be in a field-heavy role. By the time December rolled around, I'd enjoyed 10 consecutive weeks of shorter work weeks. Every Wednesday became a reset button. I'd go to the gym, run errands, or just sit home and enjoy the quiet. Meanwhile, my Christmas vacation approached, adding 3 full weeks off on top of it. Effectively, I'd engineered a 3-month stretch without a single field trip. In early December, Frank called me into his office again. He didn't sound angry, just resigned. "You know, this isn't what I meant," he said. I replied, "I followed your instructions exactly. I didn't take them all at once, and I didn't take any Fridays." He sighed and muttered, "Next time I'll be more specific." I nodded and said, "That's probably a good idea." When January arrived and everything returned to normal, I resumed field service like nothing had happened. There were no disciplinary notes, no policy changes retroactively applied. The company still allowed overtime conversion, and managers were suddenly much clearer about how it should be scheduled. My colleagues found it hilarious. One of them told me, "You just rewrote the handbook without touching it." Looking back, I don't regret a single Wednesday. I'd earned those overtime hours through months of travel, long days, and hotel dinners. All I did was use them within the framework provided. If management wants control over how people take time off, they need to write their rules carefully. Otherwise, someone with a calendar and a bit of patience might find creative ways to follow them to the letter. And our second story. I was promised a path to promotion if I got licensed. I did everything they asked. Then they moved the goalposts. Now they're struggling without me. A few years ago, I started what I thought would be a long-term position at a company in my field. During my first performance review, my manager told me that if I pursued licensure, I could eventually be promoted to assistant manager. It wasn't presented as a vague possibility, it was framed as a clear path. Put in the work, get the credentials, and the title and pay would follow. At the time, that sounded fair. The only complication was that licensure required a bachelor's degree. I only had some college credits and an unfinished associate's degree, so I went back to school, starting with online community college to finish my associate's and then enrolling in an online university program to earn my bachelor's. I worked full-time while taking classes, sacrificing evenings and weekends for assignments and exams. I took out a modest amount of student loans to cover tuition, telling myself it was an investment in the career path my manager had encouraged. Over the next few years, I didn't just check boxes academically, I also proved myself at work. I streamlined processes, trained new hires, and kept the office running efficiently when my manager was out. I earned the unofficial title of assistant to the manager, which everyone used jokingly but also seriously, because I was the one people went to with questions. The systems I put in place made daily operations smoother. I took pride in that. I believed that once I completed my degree and passed the state exam, the assistant manager position would be a natural next step. Then, early this spring, the tone shifted. My manager began mentioning that under the new ownership, the company might not be big enough to justify having assistant managers. At first, it sounded like speculation, but the more it came up, the more it felt like groundwork for something unpleasant. I asked directly whether the position was still part of the plan. The answer became less certain each time. Eventually, I was told that instead of the anticipated $20,000 plus raise tied to a title change and increased responsibility, I should expect something closer to $6,000. The reasoning given was that the company tends to pay more for employees in other departments who have completed higher education. Tried to clarify whether that meant I would at least receive the smaller raise once my degree was finalized. The answer morphed again. Without a title change, there could be no increase in pay. Then came the phrase that changed everything. If you want more money, you'll have to leave. It wasn't said angrily, it was said casually, like advice. In that moment, I realized that the promise I'd built my academic and financial decisions around was dissolving in front of me. I'd taken on student loans and put in years of effort based on a trajectory that was now being quietly erased. They told you exactly what to do. They thought you'd never do it. They handed you the solution and assumed you'd ignore it. I don't take kindly to being misled. I understand that businesses evolve and ownership changes can affect structure, but honesty goes a long way. What frustrated me most wasn't just the money, it was the shifting narrative. First, it was a guaranteed path, then it was a path, then it was a small raise, then it was no raise at all unless I walked out the door. So I did something simple. I handed my resume to a colleague in the field and said, "If you hear of anything, keep me in mind." I didn't expect anything immediate. I assumed I'd finish my degree, sit for the state exam in December, and then begin a serious job search. but sometimes the timing aligns in ways you don't anticipate. In early June, just a couple of weeks after that conversation, I received a call about an opportunity. I hadn't applied directly. My colleague had recommended me. Within days, I was interviewing. The conversations were direct, respectful, and refreshingly transparent about compensation and growth. A few weeks later, I had a formal offer in hand that exceeded even the reduced $6,000 raise I'd been told to expect. When I scheduled a meeting with my manager to give notice, I kept it professional. I explained that I had accepted another position that aligned with my qualifications and long-term goals. The look on their face was something I won't forget. It was genuine shock. They hadn't believed I would actually take their advice and leave for more money. I suspect they thought I would grumble and stay. They asked if there was anything they could do to retain me. I replied calmly, "You told me that if I wanted more money, I'd have to leave." There wasn't much to say after that. I gave more than the industry standard notice period to ensure a smooth transition. I documented procedures, trained my replacement, and tied up loose ends. I didn't burn bridges, even though part of me was tempted. The new position does require a slightly longer commute, but the environment is healthier and the leadership is consistent in what they promise. I feel valued in a way I hadn't realized I was missing. I'll be graduating later this year and sitting for my licensure exam in December, just as planned. Only now, the growth I was working toward is supported rather than questioned. Through the grapevine, I've heard that my replacement is struggling with even the basic tasks I used to handle routinely. Processes that ran smoothly now hit snags. Deadlines are tighter. The office isn't quite as seamless. I don't take joy in anyone else's difficulty, but I do recognize the irony. When someone invests years of effort into building systems and improving operations, that contribution has value. If leadership chooses not to recognize it, the market will. And sometimes the most direct path to the raise you were promised is the one that leads you out the door. You built systems they relied on. They told you to leave for more money, so you did. Now they're learning the hard way what they lost. That's not revenge. That's just cause and effect. And our last story. He thought flattening my tires was justified. The judge disagreed. 2 years ago, I pulled into a busy parking lot with my wife and our 2 kids, already tired from a long morning and just wanting to get in and out. It was one of those automated lots where a screen at the entrance shows how many spaces are left, and it was blinking 1. We drove slowly through the rows and saw it immediately. There was technically a space, but a shiny black BMW had parked at an angle, towing in at the front, leaving barely any room for anyone else to squeeze beside it. I rolled down my window and asked the attendant if that really was the last spot, and she checked her tablet and said, "Yes, sir, system shows full capacity once you take that one." So I did what any stubborn parent with 2 impatient children would do and inched my car into that sliver of a space. It took some maneuvering, and I ended up about 3 centimeters from the BMW driver's side door. I had to fold my mirrors in and practically hold my breath while lining up. Once parked, I couldn't open my own door enough to get out, so I climbed across the console and exited through the passenger side while my kids giggled like this was some kind of game. I noticed the BMW had plenty of space on its other side, so whoever parked it had simply chosen not to center it. I shrugged it off, locked up, and we went about our day. When we came back a couple hours later, the BMW was gone. In its place was empty space and a very obvious problem. 2 of my tires were completely flat, sagging against the asphalt like someone had taken a knife to them. I crouched down and saw the valve caps missing. My wife looked at me and said, "Tell me that's just a coincidence." It wasn't. I waved over the parking attendant and showed her what had happened. She looked shocked and immediately called her manager, who told her they'd send someone within the hour to help. I was furious, but I tried to keep my voice steady. My wife took the kids home in a taxi because there was no point in all of us standing in a hot parking lot. I stayed behind and called the police to file a report. I also asked the manager for access to their security footage. He told me flatly, "We can't release video without an official police complaint." So I made one right there on the phone and handed the reference number to the manager. He then told me their legal department would handle any footage requests from law enforcement. By the time I finished juggling police statements and phone calls, a mechanic arrived and reinflated the tires. Fortunately, they'd just been deflated, not slashed. I drove home simmering, but I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Over the next 3 months, I had to repeatedly follow up with the parking company to ensure they sent the video to the police. The first time they sent the wrong camera angle, the second time they sent the correct camera but for the wrong time frame. It felt less like incompetence and more like deliberate stalling. Eventually, the police received the full footage. When I went in to amend my original complaint, the officer showed me the clip. It was crystal clear. The BMW driver parked, got out, glanced at how close my car was, threw up his hands in exaggerated frustration, then pulled out a few minutes later. He parked nearby, walked back over to my car, looked around, crouched down, and methodically deflated 2 of my tires. His license plate was fully visible the entire time. The officer looked at me and said, "Well, that makes this simple." He was annoyed you parked close after he took up 2 spots, so he came back, let the air out of your tires, and drove off. On camera, with his plate visible. Some people really think the rules don't apply to them. A few months after that, I received a letter inviting me to arbitration. I responded in writing that I declined and that the matter would proceed through the judicial system. I attached that arbitration offer to my case documentation. About a week later, I received a call from a lawyer representing the young man's family. He told me in a measured tone that the kid was upset and made a mistake and that I should consider being reasonable. He offered me a few thousand souls to drop everything. I told him I was not interested and asked not to be contacted again. That didn't stop the calls. Every couple of months, a new lawyer would reach out with a slightly different pitch. Sometimes it was framed as a mutually beneficial settlement. Other times it was more direct. You don't want to ruin a young man's future over a parking misunderstanding. Each time I refused and forwarded records of the contact to my attorney so it could be added to the case file. By then, it had been about 6 months since the incident, and the court date was set nearly a year out. When the day finally arrived, almost 2 years after that afternoon in the parking lot, I showed up with my lawyer. The BMW driver, whose name I later learned was Martin, arrived with his father and their attorney. They made one final attempt in the hallway to negotiate. His lawyer said, "This can still be resolved privately." I simply replied, "We're already here." Inside the courtroom, the video was played. There wasn't much to argue about. The footage showed him clearly, his gestures, his return to my car, and his deliberate actions. The judge's decision came quickly. Martin was found guilty of common vandalism. He was sentenced to a 50-day fine at 50% income assessment, which worked out to around $1,700, and 90 days of home arrest. His father looked like someone had just informed him that his son's temper tantrum had become very expensive. They filed an appeal, but it was dismissed a few weeks later. Last week, I was informed that the verdict was now final. The payment deadline was set for October 10th with a warning that failure to pay would convert home arrest into jail time. Yesterday, I received a call asking for my bank details. Today, the transfer arrived. On Monday, I'll confirm receipt with the court and close this chapter. So, Martin, if you ever stumble across this, I hope those 90 days at home give you plenty of time to reflect. It's unfortunate your university doesn't accept house arrest as a valid excuse and you'll lose the semester's credits. But perhaps next time you feel inconvenienced by someone else's parking job, you'll remember how this one ended. Breaking down who walked away satisfied. The first story runs on creative interpretation. Frank said no Fridays and no long stretches, so the OP took every Wednesday off for 10 weeks. The lesson, be careful what you ask for because someone might actually do it. The second story runs on transparency becoming a trap. The company promised a path, then moved it, then said, leave if you want more. So the OP left, found a better job, better pay, and better leadership. Meanwhile, the old office is struggling with systems the narrator built. The third story runs on the cost of a temper. Martin got annoyed, deflated 2 tires, and thought that was the end of it. But the parking lot footage didn't lie, and the judge didn't hesitate. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.